Well, it's good to be with you this morning. My name's Josh, and I'm the executive pastor here, and I get to oversee a lot of the ministry we do, a lot of the staff, and get to be a part of a lot of the cool things going on here. Now, the last time I preached was January 9th, and I know you all remember it vividly. Every point that's there, I actually had the privilege of kicking off our theme for this year, which is wholehearted living in surrender to Jesus. And it was a sermon that really challenged me. We're looking at some of the ways Jesus talks about what it looks like to fully surrender yourself and why that's the best thing for us. So I had to go back and watch it because it applies to what we're talking about today. I thought you might want, a refresher. I know you remember it, but you might want a refresher. So let's watch a couple minutes of it here. Now, just to kind of confirm to you how much Jesus believed in this idea of surrendering, I want to read a few things Jesus actually said. All right, let me start in Luke chapter 9, verse 23 and 24. It says this, "Then Jesus said to them all, 'Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it.'" Right, Jesus says here, the best thing is actually if we lose our life, and that means lose our control, our autonomy, and do what God says, because that is always going to be better than what we think. That's the best thing. Deny ourselves, follow Jesus. Luke 14:33 says, "In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples." What does Jesus says here? You have to give up just a little bit, just some, everything. That's how far Jesus goes. And then I feel like this Matthew verse goes even harder. I mean, this hits really close to my heart. Matthew 10:37-39 said, "Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me." Why does Jesus put it in such stark terms? Like, why does he make it so clear that we should love God more than anything else? The reason is because Jesus knows that's what's best for us. If God is God, that means God always is right, always knows what's best, always is looking out for the best for us. So the best thing for us is to always be trying to love God. Not only that, ultimately that will help us love our kids and parents more, right? The verse says you need to love Jesus more than your parents or your kids. Well, that's because ultimately if you do that, it'll be the best thing for your parents and kids too. Well, as I said, those are pretty powerful words by Jesus, and the best thing for us, by far, the best thing for us is to surrender more and more of ourselves, to do more and more of what God says, even if we're not feeling like it at the moment. And I believed that then, I believe it now. There's one big problem. What happens when you believe it, in your head you believe it, but you don't feel like doing it? If I'm honest with you, and the sermon series is honest to God, I've got to be honest with you. The next 3 months after I preached that sermon, actually more than that, the few months after I didn't really feel like it. And, it's kind of like eating broccoli. I'm sorry if you like broccoli, but I never like eating broccoli. There are a lot of times I like following Jesus, but I never like eating broccoli. I mean, it just never do. And unfortunately, you know that if you eat broccoli, it's better for you. Your body will work better. You'll probably actually feel better. But man, eating potato chips and ice cream sure sounds a whole lot better. And it's similar with our spiritual life that we cannot feel like it. And when we don't feel like it often kind of feels like things inside ourselves aren't working quite well. And that is why I'm kicking off a 3-week sermon series today called Honest to God When You're Just Not Feeling Like It. And as I told you, I'm going to be honest with you. Often those of us who go to church, it's kind of hard to be honest with. Like if we're not feeling like it, we go to church and everyone's like, "Yay!" and we're like, "Eh." I mean, you gotta pretend. And imagine if you're the pastor, right? Imagine if you're the pastor and you're not necessarily feeling like it. Like there's a lot of pressure to do this. And to be honest, part of me not feeling like it was a culmination of a couple years of really tough times. There's tough times in our world. You guys have been through those things as well. In fact, this past week we had a couple issues where we kind of kind of COVID, I tested positive, or I was near someone that tested positive, and they're coming to me for answers, and I'm like, no, I thought we were done with that. I had so many times when people were asking me all these questions. I had to figure out, how do we do this? How do we do that? And people say, no, we should do it this way. No. I'm just like, no more. I was a little tired. You know, my wife knew things were really bad at one point. I've been working here at Black Rock Church for 19 years. And for the first time ever in 19 years, I took a sick day. She was like, do we need to, she was about ready to call the ambulance. Like, something's got to be wrong. I once preached 2 days after I had back surgery, not because I had to, but because this is what I like doing. I love being the person that says, yeah, let's race up the hill. We're going to help this person. We're going to figure out how to help more people, tell them about Jesus. Come on, let's go. And now, rather than racing up the hill, I was like, I don't really want to walk up the hill. I'm like, I was tired. Now, imagine that you're that pastor, and then people come to you and say, hey, Josh, you're preaching for 3 weeks in June. You got to tell me what we're talking about. You got to tell me what you're preaching on. I'm like, oh, come on. So I said something really dumb at the time. I said, you know what I'm going to preach on? I'm going to preach on how do you be wholehearted when you're just not feeling like it? And all of a sudden, here we are today. How do you follow God when you're just not feeling like it? So I need you to also be a little honest about where you are during the series. Now, I know there's some of you that are like, you're on fire. That's great. We had awesome baptisms last week that we talked about. There's some people, there's great. And I saw some of the people at the picnic this past Wednesday, and they're like, yeah. And I was like, yeah. No, I'm just kidding. I know some of you you're fired up, which is great. That's great for you. And, I would suggest during this series, maybe it'll help you relate to some of your friends who maybe aren't feeling it. Or maybe, you should take some notes, because I guarantee you there's going to be times when you're not feeling like it. And there is one really good news, though. There's one really good news. As I was kind of looking into this a little bit, I found out that I'm almost close to say all major biblical characters had a time when they weren't feeling like they really wanted to wholeheartedly follow God. In fact, Jesus himself, when he was in the Garden of Eden, just before he got arrested, he prayed. He's like, God, can you kind of take this cup from me? And he was like, hey, God, I don't really want to go be tortured and killed for all of humanity. Can we go without that torture and killed part? And ultimately he did it. But in that moment, he wasn't really feeling like it. He didn't fully want to follow God in that moment. And so the good news is, if you're not feeling like it right now, you're in good company. Most of the major biblical characters had times where they weren't feeling like it. So what I want to do over the next 3 weeks is I want to look at 3 Old Testament biblical characters and look at times when they weren't feeling like it, and then also look at how that works with certain kind of modern, those of us who are kind of feeling that way, all right? So let me show you what I mean. This week, today, we are going to talk about Jeremiah. Now, Jeremiah is going to help the modern day person I'm calling Burned Out Barry. All right, now Burned Out Barry has served God a lot, but at the moment, just not feeling like it. In fact, sometimes Burned Out Barry is a little jaded or cynical because, especially towards other Christians, because of what is going on in his heart at the moment. So today we're going to look at Jeremiah and Burned Out Barry. Next week, we're going to look at Moses. Now, Moses felt kind of insecure, both because of things that he had done, choices he had made in his life, and also because who he was. And so he's going to help those of us who feel like unhealthy Ursula. And then finally, on the third week, I'm going to talk about Jonah. Now, Jonah's a guy who specifically, God said, go do this. And he's like, no, I don't want to go do that. And then he got mad when God actually didn't do some of the stuff that he wanted God to do. And Jonah helps those of us who feel a little bit like self-focused Sergio. So that's what we're going to do over the next 3 weeks. We're going to look at these characters and how they help us understand those of us, and very different reasons. There's also very different reasons why we may not feel like it. And so we're going to look at those over the next 3 weeks. So I mentioned we are starting with Jeremiah today. Now, Jeremiah is an Old Testament prophet. Some of you may know about him, but a lot of us, we aren't the most familiar with Jeremiah. We may or may not have read the book of Jeremiah. So what I thought I should do do to help us kind of get a background of who he is show a couple-minute clip that introduces all of us to who Jeremiah is. It's from the Bible Project. Let's watch this.
The book of the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah was an Israelite priest who lived and worked in Jerusalem during the final decades of the kingdom of southern Judah. He was called as a prophet to warn Israel about the severe consequences of breaking their covenant with God through their idolatry and injustice. And he even predicted that the empire of Babylon would come as God's servant to bring this judgment on Israel by destroying Jerusalem, taking the people into exile. And sadly, his words became reality. Jeremiah lived through the siege and destruction of Jerusalem and witnessed the exile personally. Now, this book came into existence in a really interesting way. Chapter 36 tells us that after 20 years of Jeremiah's preaching in Jerusalem, God called him to collect all of his sermons and poems and essays and commit them to writing, which Jeremiah did by employing a scribe named Baruch, who wrote down and compiled all of this material into a scroll. Now, Baruch also gathered lots of stories about Jeremiah, and he linked all the pieces together. And so this is why the book reads like an anthology, a collection of collections. It's all been arranged to present this prophet as a messenger of God's justice and grace. So the book begins with God calling Jeremiah to be a prophet, and he's given a dual vocation. He will be a prophet to Israel, but also to the nations. And his words will both uproot and tear down, but also plant and build up. In other words, he's going to accuse Israel and warn them of God's coming judgment, but he also has a message of hope for the future. Now, this opening perfectly summarizes the first large section, chapters 1 to 24. It's a collection of Jeremiah's writings from before the exile. And the core idea here is that Israel has broken the covenant with God and violated all the terms of the agreement they made that are written in the Torah. And in a number of ways. They've adopted the worship of all kinds of Canaanite gods, building idol shrines all over the land. And Jeremiah develops the metaphor of idolatry as adultery and uses the language of prostitution, promiscuity, unfaithfulness to describe how Israel has given their allegiance to other gods. Jeremiah also repeatedly accuses Israel's leaders. The priests, the kings, the other prophets have all become corrupt. They've abandoned the Torah and the covenant, which has led to a tragic result: rampant social injustice. The most vulnerable people in Israelite communities, the widows, the orphans, the immigrants, were all being taken advantage of in clear violation of the laws of the Torah. And Israel's leaders didn't even seem to care. So a classic place where all of these ideas come together is in chapter 7. It's called Jeremiah's Temple Sermon. The Israelites are coming to worship their God in the temple as if everything is just fine. But outside the temple, they are worshiping other gods. And some were even adopting the horrifying Canaanite practice of child sacrifice. And so Jeremiah makes his very unpopular announcement. The God of Israel is coming in judgment. He's going to destroy his own temple and punish Israel by sending an enemy from the north. This is an army that God would allow to conquer Jerusalem. And as you read on, you discover he's talking about the great empire of Babylon.
All right, there's not going to be a quiz. You don't have to remember all the details, but there's a couple important things. One thing we learn is that Jeremiah is a prophet. What that means is God gave him a message, and his role was to go and share that with people. Now, sometimes when we think of the word prophet today, we think of some really important person, like, ooh, prophet so-and-so said this. They must be, really important. Now, in the Bible, most of the time, the prophet was a very tough job, difficult job, and also a very dangerous job, because most of the time you were going to people and saying, hey, you shouldn't be doing this. You're doing something you shouldn't be doing. You need to stop doing that. And that's exactly what Jeremiah was doing. Jeremiah was going and saying, hey, you're not doing the right thing. You're not following God the way you're supposed to. You need to stop doing that. And if you don't do that, you're going to get overtaken. Your nation's going to get overtaken, which is also what happened. That's what we said in the video. So this is what Jeremiah was doing. And as a result of that, things were not going well for him. Just as I read Jeremiah 20, verses 1 and 2, this is what happened when he kind of went and was a prophet. He said, when the priest Pashur, son of Immer, the official in charge of the temple of the Lord, heard Jeremiah prophesying these things, he had Jeremiah the prophet beaten and put into the stocks. So you can imagine this, among a few other things, were making Jeremiah not really feel like following God. Like, not really feel like it. I mean, things were not going well for him. In fact, he very vividly describes how he was feeling also in Jeremiah chapter 20. I'm going to read from verse 7. This is now Jeremiah talking. He says this. He says, you deceived me, Lord, and I was deceived. You overpowered me and prevailed. I am ridiculed all day long. Everybody mocks me. Whenever I speak, I cry out, proclaiming violence and destruction. So the word of the Lord has brought me insult and reproach all day long. But if I say, I will not mention his word or speak any more in his name, his word is in my heart like a fire shut up in my bones. I am weary of holding it in. I cannot. Cursed be the day I was born. May the day my mother bore me not be blessed. Cursed be the man who brought the news to my father, who made him very glad, saying, a child is born to you, a son. Why did I come out of the womb to see trouble and sorrow and to end my days in shame? Jeremiah was not feeling like following God. Man, he was not feeling it at all. He was upset because he actually was doing what God said, right? He was kind of wholeheartedly. He was going and doing. God said, hey, you should go tell this to people. And so he did it. He actually followed God. And this is what happened to him. He was mocked and ridiculed and hurt, actually. And then he goes, okay, what I like about this is part of him is like, hey, he kind of wanted not to go and share that, not to be the prophet. But he said, all right, if I don't actually go say the words that God has put in my heart, it's like a fire burning inside of him. So he can't not say it because he has this fire burning inside of him where he has to follow God. But if he does say it, which he's been doing, he gets himself in trouble and gets beat up and all these things. And so he's weary, right? It says it right there. I'm weary, God. That's the way Jeremiah was feeling. That may be the way you're feeling. And I got to admit to you, that's the way I was and to some extent still are feeling. And as I said, a lot of it culmination of a few years of just the things going on. I love Black Rock Church. I love the fact that we have a core statement of faith on the basic truths of the Bible, and we stick to that. We are going to stick to the core of the truths of the Bible. But beyond that, we like to hold a lot of unity, right? We like to hold people together in unity. And to be honest, the past couple of years have not been a time when unity is really lifted up. In fact, there's been a lot of division inside the church a little bit, and especially outside the church. And so when you kind of push, man, it can get weary. You know, you got some people who are like, hey, this theological position, this is the most important. Let's exclude people who have other views that are, still somewhat decent views. And no, let's have this one kind of political view and exclude people who might have this other one that's also falls within Christianity. Hey, let's have this one method. We got to do church this way, and let's exclude other people who have other good ideas. And man, it can get weary. Maybe you're feeling weary this morning too, and maybe it's for different reasons. Maybe you're weary because you've actually been living for God at work, right? You're following God at work, but because of that, you're passed over for just promotions and things. Maybe you're weary because at work or school or at home, you're following God, but people don't appreciate it. In fact, they kind of make fun of you a little bit and wonder why you're acting that way. Maybe you're weary because you have been serving inside or outside the church and you've been helping so many people and now all of a sudden what used to bring you joy is a chore. Here's some other ways you may be a burned out Barry. You may be burned out Barry if serving others feels like a chore when it used to bring you joy. You may be burned out Barry if spiritual practices like prayer and Bible reading, etc. feel forced. You may be burned out Barry if you lack motivation or energy. Little things make you angry. You're becoming cynical or bitter. I see this a lot, this last one, where you withdraw from people who care about you. I've seen a lot of people within the church that are struggling with this a little bit, and as a result, they isolate themselves. For me, I noticed one of these, this kind of irritable, the check engine light came on in our car the other day, and it's an older car. It's not the biggest thing, but my son was supposed to be taking his driving test in a couple weeks, and the DMV says you can't take a driving test if the check engine light is on. And so I was just like, why? I'm like, I got really mad. Like, what? I had to stop and go, like, what? Why are you so mad about? Like, thankfully, you'll be happy to know that got the car fixed. My son passed his driver's test, which is good for him. I don't know if it's good for you out on the road, but it's good for him, But you notice these little things, like they like cause you, like, why are these things causing me so much anger? Like, these are just normal, everyday things that you may be like Jeremiah and like a burned out Barry. Now, the good news is God actually talks directly to Jeremiah and gives him great advice as to how you live this out. How do you live coming out of this idea? It's in Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 16 says this. This is what the Lord says. Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient path. Ask where the good way is and walk in it. And you will find rest for your souls. Man, that phrase, rest for your souls, that sounds nice, doesn't it? Especially if you're weary. If you're feeling like Jeremiah, if you're feeling like burned out Barry, man, that rest for your souls. Man, I could go for some of that. So how do we get there? Well, this verse kind of has 4 words that really stand out that help us understand how we get there. It says stand, look, ask, walk. And it starts with that word stand at the crossroads. If you're feeling like burned out Barry, you're at a crossroads and you can continue going the path you've been going, which probably will lead to more frustration, more weariness, bitterness even, or you can stop, slow down, and assess. Now notice it says stand. It doesn't say, well, just, go a little slower. It doesn't say crawl. It doesn't say walk. It says stop and stand and assess what's going on inside you that you feel this weariness. Often in church, we tell you to do more. You should do this, you should do that, you should do that. We have a lot of great things going on here. And in the future weeks, we're going to talk about how some of us, the reason we're not feeling it is because we actually need to do some things. But today we're talking to Jeremiah and burned out Barry. You are a person who you serve a lot, you do a lot, and you need to stop and slow down. And if you're burned out Barry, it's probably hard for you to do that. Because you're a person who's naturally a doer. You're the person who's running up the hill. You're the person who gets, some of your self-worth comes from the acknowledgments from doing these things you do. I once bought a friend of mine a book. The title of the book was, When I Relax, I Feel Guilty. You might be one of those people where it's just like, you're just going, and you need to slow down. And if you don't, you're probably going to continue on the path that you're on. You are at a crossroads now. In fact, probably if you're in this way, you're like, I don't really know how to slow down, which is why this verse goes on. First, you stop, you stand, then you look. You look both inward and upward, right? You're looking inward. You're going, hey, what is going on inside of me? This sermon series is called Honest to God for 2 reasons. One is the phrase honest to God means you're telling the truth, right? If you're telling someone a story and they don't believe you, you'll be like, honest to God, man, that's what happened. That's exactly the way you sound too, just in case you're wondering. Honest to God, man. So you use that phrase to say, no, I'm telling the truth. You need to tell the truth to yourself about what's going on. And the second reason is you need to be honest to God. We often try to pretend we're better around other people. We even do it to God. You need to stop and be honest to God about what's going on. So honest to God, you need to be honest to God. Right? You need to be looking inward to say, what is going on? Why is it that I am feeling the way I'm feeling as you slow down? The next thing it says to do is to ask. Ask for the ancient path. We need to ask God and also some spiritual mentors. I love the phrase that says, ask the ancient path. The way that you help yourself in this situation is usually not some sort of newfangled cure. It's actually ancient practices. One of the most helpful in this situation is the ancient practice of solitude. That literally means spending time completely by yourself, just you and God without any distractions. No phones, no music, no sound, no nothing. Because what happens if you spend time in absolute solitude, what happens is your inner thoughts start to come out. And sometimes we like to keep those down because we're like, no, I'm just going to keep those down. I don't want to deal with what's going on in my head. But if you're burned out, you've got to deal with what's going on inside of you. So you need to stop. And sometimes, again, we're uncomfortable with that, but we need to step into that in order to step towards that rest for our souls. Another great thing is to ask and reach out and ask for some help from someone you know is a good friend that'll give you some good spiritual advice, like a spiritual mentor. If you are trying to do this on your own, and again, this is very common that we actually isolate ourselves, what happens is we often start a spiral of bitterness that kind of keeps us from even reaching out more. If you are feeling like burned out Barry, and you have not told anyone, you need to tell someone today. I'm serious, today. Like, call someone, send them a text message, write an old-fashioned letter, get a stamp on it, lick it, put it on, send it off. Whatever you do, tell someone today, because you need a spiritual friend to be going with you, to be carrying your burden with you. One of the other things I did is you could do this, you can reach out for other good spiritual resources. I actually bought a stack of books. I'll read you some of the titles of them. They say, Replenish, Leading from a Healthy Soul, Recapturing the Wonder, Soul Keeping, Caring for the Most Important of You, Inside Out, Soul Care. So I had this whole stack of books. My problem is I don't really feel like reading them. But I would make myself, sometimes it would just be like one page, maybe 2 pages, and I'd underline a phrase that really was memorable to me off those pages. And over time, I was able to kind of read a little bit more, be able to process those a little bit more. But we need to ask for help. And then finally, the last thing it says, walk towards a renewed soul. So the last thing we need to do is actually, after we've done this, after we've stopped, we've slowed down, we need to take a step. And maybe that step is towards slowing down. For some of us, we have responsibilities. We have things going on. And so it's going to take some time for us to step towards slowing down. Maybe it's a step towards reaching out. Like I just said, reach out to somebody. You've got to step towards reaching out. Maybe it's a step towards spending some time in solitude with God to go, hey, what is going on? But you have to take a step. You have to walk, but you have to walk in a different direction from the one you were going. The ancient path that leads you towards rest for your souls. I did want to mention that currently in our culture, there's a lot of talk about self-care, which self-care is a good thing, but there's a difference between a little bit of what we're talking about in self-care. Oftentimes in self-care, it talks about things that just help you escape from what's going on in your world. So taking vacation is great. You should take vacation and you should take me with you, all right? So taking vacation is great, but taking vacation, if you don't deal with some of the stuff going on inside of you, you come back from vacation and you're in the same spot. Other ways of escaping are good. You can binge on Netflix, and I love documentaries. I love watching Netflix documentaries. I've watched all, so you can take me with that too. Make some popcorn, we'll do it. But the problem is if you don't deal with what's going on inside of you, you come back from those escapes, you come back from the spa day, and you're back to where you were before. This is deeper than that. This is dealing with what's going on inside of me. This is spending time with God, getting some good guidance from other people who help me deal with what's going on in my soul so that I can walk in the correct path, the right way, and find the rest for my soul that God talks about here. And the beauty is, what it says here is, if we do this, you can find some of that rest. You can find that. It's going to take some time, but it's there. So the first thing I want you to know is if you're here this morning and you're feeling like Jeremiah or burned out Barry and you're weary, it's okay. It's okay to be where you are. Like everyone, all the greats in the Bible have been there. And then we can look and go, hey, how do we do that? Now, some people ask me, hey, Josh, so man, you sound like you're in a bad spot. Like, is everything okay with you? And the answer is, I'm definitely better. I'm definitely better than I was 2 months ago. I wouldn't say I'm fully back. I'm still a little less energetic and less passion for life than I've had before in my past, but I am walking towards a path that's leading me there. And you can as well. Now, as I was studying this last week, I found this video popped up on social media. Some of you will have seen it. And it seemed to illustrate what we're talking about this morning. This idea that we can be floundering in life, just kind of floundering around. And ultimately what we have to do is stop. And it seems very clear that this person kind of reached out, asked for some help because they get some support that comes around them and helps them go on the right path. Let's check out this video. right, some of you didn't catch that. Let's roll the video again so you see what happens, all right? Let's roll. Some of you were like, you thought this was going to be serious. All right, let's go roll again. Let's see this. All right, so we see the floundering, right? I mean, man, that looks like a weary turtle to me. Seems to have reached out because people are coming to help. They stop. Slow down. Oh, on the right path. All right, there we go. I know it's humorous, but it's a little bit of a metaphor for often our life, right? We feel like that sometimes, like we're floundering, weary. But God promises that if we are honest to God about what's going on, if we take some of these steps toward dealing with it going on inside us, we can find rest for our weary soul.
Thank you for watching Blackrock Church's Sunday service. We're so glad you found us, and we hope this message made you feel more connected to God. In talking about connection, we find that it's super important for people to be connected to others and to community in order to grow in their faith. So if you're in the area, we invite you to join us to worship in a service. You can find out about our times and locations right here on this webpage. We'd also love to help you connect in a group and find people who can walk alongside you as you continue deepening your understanding and faith. And after you get to know us, you might even like to use your gifts to serve on a team. We believe God gave each of us unique gifts that we can use to serve those around us. One body with many different parts. If you're not able to be here in person, don't worry. We have a great online community and many ways for you to join in virtually and talk to us throughout the week. You can also stay in touch on our website, YouTube channel, Facebook, and Instagram. By visiting our website, you can also easily give your offering one time as an online gift or a recurring gift. Just click Give at the top. The Bible tells us that tithing is an important part of our relationship with Jesus, and we want to continue to trust God with our lives and our finances. Well, we are so glad you made the choice to get to know us and view one of our services. We hope that you join us next week. Thanks so much for watching.